The sun hung low over the Arizona desert, bleeding crimson across the horizon as 17-year-old Luke Hargrove nudged open the creaking gate of his family's worn-out ranch, unaware that one small act of kindness that evening would change his life forever and shake the entire territory. Luke had lived all his years on that lonely patch of land, just him, his widowed father, some tired horses, and memories of a mother who used to sing old frontier songs while the coyotes howled. They were poor and forgotten by the world, holding on to their ranch by sheer stubbornness. But Luke had a heart that refused to turn cold, even when the desert around him tried its best. The evening wind blew hot and dry, whipping sand into his face as he carried a bucket of water to the fence line, humming the same tune his mother used to hum. That was when he heard it, a heavy, unfamiliar sound like slow thunder, like footsteps too large to belong to anyone he'd ever met. He looked up, and standing there across the fence was the tallest girl he had ever seen. She towered like a giant, her shadow stretching long across the dust, her features strong and proud, her hair braided with feathers, and beads that shimmered faintly in the dying sunlight. She was clearly Apache, but not like the stories the townsfolk whispered about. She looked exhausted, her lips cracked, her breaths uneven. Despite her enormous height, easily a head taller than any grown man, her eyes were filled not with fierceness, but desperation. Luke froze, unsure whether to run, shout, or reach for the rifle by the barn door. But something inside him, maybe courage, maybe foolishness, made him stay exactly where he was. The giant Apache girl raised her hands slowly to show she meant no harm and pointed weakly at the bucket in his hand, her cracked voice barely managing a whisper in broken English. "Water, please." Luke's heart thumped. Apaches rarely came this close to ranches. Rumors spoke of raids, vengeance, warriors who appeared from the mountains like spirits. But he saw the trembling in her fingers, the weariness in her posture, and suddenly she didn't look like a threat at all, just a huge, exhausted girl lost in a world that feared her. Without a word, Luke stepped forward and held out the bucket. She grabbed it carefully, as if afraid she'd break it, and lifted it to her lips. She drank with the hunger of someone who hadn't tasted water in days. Some of it spilled down her chin, darkening the dust below. Luke watched, strangely mesmerized. When she finished, she placed the bucket back in his hands with surprising gentleness and whispered, "Thank you, small cowboy." Luke blinked. It wasn't an insult. There was a softness in her voice that made him smile. "Name's Luke," he replied, trying not to stare. "You lost?" The girl hesitated, glancing toward the distant mountains as if unsure how much to reveal, then said, "I am Taya, daughter of Chief Nantan. I left camp, too far. Storm took our horses. I walked for long." Luke had heard of Chief Nantan. Everyone had. He was the leader of one of the most respected Apache tribes, known for his fairness, but feared for his unmatched army. If Taya was truly his daughter, then he wasn't just looking at a lost girl, he was looking at Apache royalty. Luke swallowed. "You need help?" "Food, more water?" he asked, though part of him trembled at the idea of harboring the chief's daughter on his land. She nodded slowly. "I walk back tomorrow. Need rest." Luke looked at the ranch. His father wasn't home. He'd ridden into town for supplies and wouldn't return until morning. Luke knew what his father would say if he saw an Apache girl, especially one this large, sitting near their barn. But Luke also knew what he needed to do. "You can stay," he said quietly. "We got a small barn. Clean hay. It's safe here." Taya smiled, a simple smile that looked strange and beautiful on her strong face, and followed him as gently as someone her size could. She ducked to enter the barn, her height forcing her to crouch deeply, and sat against the wall with a sigh of relief. Luke brought her more water, some dried meat, and even an old blanket. "Why help me?" she asked after a moment, her voice softer now. Luke shrugged. "'Cause you looked like you needed it." "'Cause my mama always said, kindness is never wasted." Taya looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Respect, wonder, gratitude. "You are brave," she said softly. "Most run from me," Luke chuckled nervously. Trust me, I thought about it. They talked for hours, hesitant at first, then more freely. She told him about the mountains, the streams, the dances by moonlight. He told her about his ranch, the debts they owed, the dreams he had of one day making something of this barren land. Somewhere in the middle of their conversation, Luke forgot she was Apache, forgot she was a giant, forgot everything except that he was sitting with someone who saw him, truly saw him in a way no one else had. But when dawn began creeping over the hills, Taya stood and said she had to go. "My father." "He worry," she murmured, "but I will not forget you." "Luke." She touched his shoulder lightly, yet even that light. A touch felt like a boulder, settling on him, and walked toward the mountains, her silhouette growing smaller with every step. Luke watched her until she vanished into the morning fog. He felt strangely empty afterward, a quiet ache growing in his chest, though he didn't know why. When his father returned that afternoon, Luke didn't mention Taya, partly because he didn't want to worry him, partly because the memory felt too magical, too secret to share. He spent the rest of the day fixing fence posts, brushing horses and replaying her voice in his head. But as night fell, something strange happened. The ground trembled. The horses panicked. A distant rumbling echoed like a storm, though the sky was clear. Luke stepped outside his cabin and froze. From the dark line of the mountains, shapes emerged, hundreds of them. Torches flickered. Shadows moved in formation. The sound grew louder, like 1,000 drums beating the earth. When they came into full view under the moonlight, Luke's blood ran cold. There were warriors, Apache warriors, lined across the entire horizon, their faces painted, their spears raised, their horses snorting fire into the night. Not 10, not 50, not 100, at least 300 of them, forming a massive circle around the Hargrove Ranch. Luke's father burst out of the cabin, rifle in hand, shouting, "Luke, get inside!" But Luke couldn't move, because at the front of the warriors, seated tall atop a magnificent white horse, was Chief Nantan himself, and beside him, towering proudly, her eyes locked onto Luke with a fire he had never seen before, was Taya. And from the look on her face, he knew this was not a raid. This was something far more dangerous and far more personal. The kindness he offered last night had been noticed, and now the entire Apache nation had come to answer it.